Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this morning's Beef Brunch Educational Series webinar. My name is Jason Holmes. I'm a livestock specialist in the Northeast region. I'll be your host today. Our presenter today is Dr. Gary Hay. Dr. Hay is a professor and area livestock agent in Southeast Louisiana, and today he'll be discussing some of the tips for purchasing beef bulls when we're using them for natural service. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. We will be muting your microphones. We ask that you please keep them muted throughout the webinar. If you are joining us online via the Teams app or link, please enter your questions into the Q&A box at any time during the presentation. If you're calling in, you may text your questions to Jason at 318-243-4931. Again, if you are calling in, you can text your questions throughout the webinar to me, that's Jason, to 318-243-4931. In the interest of time, we will wait to answer all questions at the end of Dr. Hay's presentation. So with that, Dr. Hay, thank you for joining us this morning, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Jason. I really appreciate the invitation this morning, and I hope what we can talk about here will be very valuable for some of you who are in the market for purchasing beef bulls. I think this is a very timely part of the year to do this. I know most of you probably like to purchase bulls in the late winter, early spring to put them out with your cows. So doing this a couple of months before that kind of gives you some ideas to think about and maybe carry through when you start looking at decisions to purchase bulls. Okay, I'm going to talk about really about 2 or 3 different things here. The first topic we're going to cover for the first few minutes is health concerns. I think a lot of times when we go out and purchase bulls, particularly if we purchase them at breeder sales or consignment sales, sometimes health concerns get overlooked because we just make the assumption that whoever's putting the sale on is taking care of all that. However, I want to just remind you that it is your responsibility as a buyer to make sure that the animals you're buying are healthy and they have all the vaccinations and everything they need in order to perform for you. There's several health concerns that you really need to consider before buying bulls, and especially before commingling those with your cattle. These concerns are important to ensure that you're buying a healthy bull that will successfully breed your cattle without introducing any type of infectious disease into your herd. So the main things are you want a healthy bull that will breed cattle and they won't infect your cattle. The first thing to keep in mind, or the first item I'll talk about here real quick, is vaccinations and health certificates. The first health concern you need to be aware of as a buyer is making sure any bulls you're considering purchasing are up to date on all their recommended vaccinations for your region. It means they may not have to be vaccinated for everything, but you probably need to consult with a veterinarian, local veterinarian, to make sure that they are up to date on all their vaccinations for that region. Also a good idea to get a seller, to get a health certificate from the seller. In other words, make sure that bull has had a inspection from a veterinarian so that they don't have any obvious or even any hidden health concerns that you may not be able to recognize visually. It's a good idea to always buy virgin bulls. If you purchase virgin bulls, you eliminate the potential for introducing trichomoniasis into your herd. And if you're not aware, and I'm sure most of you are, trichomoniasis is a highly contagious venereal disease. It's caused by a protozoa. It can cause major economic losses due to infertility, low pregnancy rates, extended calving seasons, and occasionally you'll get some abortions in pregnant animals. The other problem with trich is it's extremely difficult to eliminate from the herd once you introduce it. So it's a good idea to make sure you're buying virgin bulls. And usually if you're buying virgin bulls, they're going to be the younger bulls in a herd, the young bulls. And so genetically, if they've been bred correctly, that should be some of your best genetics. It's a good idea to get a breeding soundness exam on any bulls you purchase. And make sure you get a BSE that's performed by a veterinarian using what's called a Society of Theriogenology form. And there's a specific form they fill out and they put all the information there that you'll have. A BSE generally includes a gross morphology, sperm motility, and a scrotal circumference. And this will help ensure your bulls are healthy and they're fertile. It won't guarantee it, but it does go a long way toward making sure you're buying fertile bulls. And the last thing you probably want to do is go out and spend money on a bull that's not going to get cows bred. Another important aspect of this health concerns when buying bulls is mobility. A bull's mobility or ability to move is critical to his ability to breed cows in a pasture situation. I think that's pretty much common sense. Everybody kind of understands that. So before buying bulls, it's probably a good idea to check their mobility just by watching them move around. You might want to check their feet and their conformation to make sure there are no issues there. You know, sometimes you can get into issues that if you go out and you're looking at bulls that are laid just in a pen laying down and you don't see them get up and move, they may have some conformation issues, you know, sore shoulders or something that was going to really limit their mobility. Another thing you might want to do is talk to your veterinarian about this condition called corkscrew claw and how to avoid it, because it's really not easy to identify in young bulls, and it will certainly affect their mobility as they get older. Another thing to keep in mind about health condition is make sure you quarantine all bulls for a minimum of 30 days before commingling with your cows. Just in case there's something that has been missed, at least you're giving them an opportunity to recognize a disease or an infection before you commingle them. You may want to talk to your vet also about any diseases which may not be eliminated by a 30-day quarantine and things that you need to watch out for. Another thing is heat stress and forage-based bull test. It's always a good idea to try to purchase bulls from southern breeders or breeders in your area. Bulls raised in similar climates tend to be more acclimated to heat stress and have less problems with diseases and pests associated with southern climates. And I'm sure all of you are aware that we have a lot more heat stress down here than they do in other parts of the country. It's also a good idea to purchase bulls from forage-based bull testing program. I would tend to avoid bulls raised on a high-grain bull testing program because the high-grain diets may cause these bulls to have more problems holding body condition during breeding season. You know, they can't hold their condition, and once they start losing condition, particularly a lot of condition, you know, they lose 150, 200 pounds, they're not going to be as sound for breeding. And you also will see sometimes these bulls on these high-grain diets for 3 to 5 months will tend to have more feet problems. They will get foundered, and you may not realize it right when you purchase them. It may come out a little later. Okay, before I go into the next section of strategies, I do want to thank Dr. Christine Navarre for helping me with this first section. Christine and I talked, and I did consult her on several of the things here, and I just wanted to recognize her and her expertise for helping me put this together. Okay, the next section I'm going to talk about here briefly is strategies for selecting bulls. You know, what do you need to be looking at when you're selecting bulls to breed to your cows once you get past the health concerns? From a genetic standpoint, how do we pick the right bulls to breed to our cows? And the first comment I'm going to make on this slide is always use EPDs to compare and select bulls. EPDs are the only accurate method for determining which bulls are genetically superior for individual traits. Once you've picked out which traits you're going to select for or you're going to try to improve in your herd, you need to make sure the bulls you're choosing from do have EPDs and that you can compare these bulls to each other. One thing that brings in mind is usually PPDs are only available on registered bulls or purebred bulls. So that should tell you right there, it's probably not a good idea to go out and select crossbred bulls to breed with your cows, because genetically you really don't know what you're going to get. The left side of this slide here, you've probably seen before if you've been through the Master Cattleman program, just a brief discussion and definition of what EPDs are. And EPDs are very accurate because they're calculated using procedures that take into account performance data on not just the bull, but their progeny, their ancestors, all other types of relatives that are available in breed or in that data set. Any of you that have been through the Master Cattle Program have seen this slide. I use this pretty extensively. This is just a typical sale catalog page, advertising 2 bulls in a breeder sale. The thing I emphasize about this slide, and I want to re-emphasize this morning, is there's a lot of information you can see by both of these bulls. But when you really start comparing bulls, the important information is on the 2 lines there that are highlighted. And that's the EPDs for several traits for these 2 bulls. If you look at the slides here, if you look at the bulls, the pictures visually, you probably think the bull on the right is a little bit more visually appealing. He's a little bit longer and leaner, a little cleaner throughout than the bull on the left. But if you start looking at their EPDs, genetically, the bull on the left, actually, even though they're pretty similar, the bull on the left has a little bit of an advantage from an EPD standpoint. And probably when you go to a sale, this old boy on the left is probably going to bring a little less money. So he's probably a better bargain when you start looking at it. Okay, strategies for selecting bulls. And again, if you've been through the Master Cattleman Program, you've heard me say this. The first step in selecting the proper bulls to use in your herd is to figure out what you're trying to do. Determine your goals and your marketing strategies. For example, if your main goal is to sell your calves as soon as you wean them, then you probably want to select bulls that will maximize pre-weaning gains. Your strategy might be to select bulls with high EPDs for weaning weight or yearling weight. That may not be the only trait you select for, but it certainly needs to be traits that are in your selection program when you're comparing bulls. On the other hand, if you're producing female replacements, either purebreds or crossbreds, and you intend to sell those, that's how you make money, or you want to keep them for your own herd, then you may want to look at bulls or select bulls that have higher EPDs for both maternal and fertility traits. You need to put a little more emphasis on that if you're trying to produce heifer female replacements. If you're contracting or working with a buyer so that you're selling calves that will be sold to a backgrounder, or if you plan to background calves or even retain ownership through the feedlot for yourself, then you probably need to place more emphasis on bull selection, on post-weaning gains, and carcass traits. If you're selling to backgrounders, they're going to be more interested in how those animals perform post-weaning. They're going to be more interested in post-weaning gain. And if they're retaining ownership or they're selling to a feedlot, of course, those feedlots are going to be a little more interested in how they perform in terms of carcass traits when they're actually finished. If you're buying bulls to breed to heifers, one of the things we strongly recommend, is selecting bulls with high calving ease EPDs to breed heifers. And that mainly means calving ease direct, but the calving ease maternal traits also are important. Most breed associations recommend using only bulls with EPDs for calving ease direct of at least 7 or 8. And it varies a little bit by breed association. So one of the things that's a good idea is before you go out and buy bulls of a specific breed, all this information is available on their websites from the breed associations. Look at the breed association websites and find out what they recommend for their breed for calving ease. If you're not sure what calving ease is, it's a relative percentage of heifers bred to a bull which have unassisted births. In other words, it's not a bull's daughters calving ease direct, but it's the percentage of heifers that he's bred to that will have unassisted births, and therefore the higher the number, the better. Calving ease maternal effects are the percentage of heifers, daughters of a bull, which have unassisted births at first calf. So it's a little bit different, the number. One thing I want to caution you is do not select bulls with only low birth weight EPDs to breed heifers. Birth weight is highly correlated to growth rates like weaning weight and yearling weight. It's also highly correlated to mature size. And if you start selecting just low birth weight bulls, you're going to get some calves that don't grow as fast. They're going to have lower growth rates, and you eventually, and it doesn't take long, a generation or two, 1 or 2 calf crops, and you're going to have some animals that have a little bit lower mature size. Now, if you're looking for animals with lower mature size, that's fine. But if you're trying to maintain high levels of pre-weaning gain, you're much better off to select for calving ease to breed your heifers than trying to select for low birth weights. And I've seen some producers down here in the southern part of the state get in trouble with that. Their calves just did not perform, and they were concerned about nutrition, and we started looking at their selection criteria, and they were using low birth weights. All right, let's talk about the final thing here, some traits to consider when you're talking about selecting bulls to breed your cows to genetically improve your herd. And when we say genetically improve, what we mean is try to improve the quality and the performance of the calves they're producing, and also improve the performance of the female offspring of those bulls so that their calves will perform better. Well, if you think about this, there are a lot of performance traits in beef cattle which have economic value. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to increase the economic value of your animals. Growth traits, fertility, maternal ability, and carcass traits are all examples of traits which can add economic value to beef cattle. And they do that by either increasing the value of the calves you sell or by decreasing the cost of maintaining mature cows. So there's two ways you can increase value. You can increase value by increasing the value of the calves, but also by decreasing the cost of maintaining your cows. Okay. When you're considering traits, always keep in mind that some traits, some characteristics of cattle have more economic values than others, and you probably should place more emphasis on those traits. For example, growth traits typically have more economic value than other traits since beef cattle are marketed by weight. In other words, heavier calves that grow faster usually bring you more money. They're more valuable than lighter calves. The other thing to keep in mind about when you're looking at how you should structure your breeding program is that some traits are more heritable than others. In other words, more of the variation in some traits is due to differences in genetics rather than environmental differences. Therefore, these traits have a higher heritability. Traits with low heritability may have economic value. They may have a lot of economic value, but they don't respond well to genetic selection. The best way to improve these traits is through better environmental management. And the one that we always talk about is reproductive management. Most of the traits that we measure in reproduction in cattle don't have very high heritabilities. That means there's a lot of differences or a lot of environmental differences between animals. You're not going to make a lot of improvement in reproductive performance in your herd by selecting on those traits. You're much better off to try to manage and improve the environment to improve those traits. Again, if you've been through the Master Cattleman program, you've seen this slide before or part of it. This just shows you an example of some of the heritabilities of traits that are common in beef cattle. And this is over numerous studies, literally dozens and dozens of studies in different types of cattle from different parts of the country and different parts of the world. And in general, what you see here is that there are several traits or types of traits that tend to have very low heritabilities. Things like maternal ability, reproduction, health differences, longevity in cows, and overall productivity. That's not to say these traits don't have a lot of economic value in cattle. It's just saying that the heritability of those traits is pretty low, and it's hard to make selection decisions that will improve these traits through genetics. The second set of traits there are moderately heritable, things like growth rates, either weaning weight or yearling weight or average daily gain, or and I think in one breed they measured as residual average daily gain, birth weights, and even milk production. These are kinds of traits that you can make genetic improvement on fairly rapidly. If you select the right bulls, you can improve growth rates, weaning weights, milk production, and so forth. And then at the bottom of this chart, you've got a set of traits that are highly heritable. Things like carcass traits and end product traits like fat thickness, marbling, loin eye area, rib eye area. Some of those things are very highly heritable. skeletal measurements, and even mature weight. And the point of this is you can make a lot of improvement in these types of traits very quickly. I'm talking one generation if you select the right bulls. All right, just to finish up on this idea real quick, growth rates in beef cattle normally have somewhere between 2 to 4 times more economic value than other traits. Not always, but in a lot of our commercial cattle operations, you've got to consider that you need to be looking at growth traits somehow. Things like weaning weight, yearling weight, and residual average daily gain should always be considered when selecting bulls for a commercial beef operation. That's not saying that's the only traits you need to look at, but you certainly don't need to ignore them. Fertility traits such as scrotal circumference also have a positive relative economic value. One of the things that's critically important besides growth rates in providing economic value in beef cattle is you got to have calves to sell. So the better your fertility, the higher your calf crop percentage, and the more opportunity you have for making money. Scrotal circumference is one of the traits that you can select for in cattle that will have a positive impact on fertility pretty quickly. Scrotal circumference affects the bull's fertility. In other words, you've all seen this in a talk or presentation somewhere before, that there's a minimum level of scrotal circumference at different ages that we talk about when we do breeding soundness exams. I think the minimum age for young bulls is maybe about 34 centimeters in circumference. But the larger that scrotal circumference, the greater the bull's fertility in general. Scrotal circumference in a bull, we now know also has a positive genetic correlation with the fertility of his female offspring. That doesn't mean it's going to guarantee his heifers, his daughters are more fertile, but it does have an impact on it, and they will tend to be more fertile the larger his scrotal circumference. Milk production in beef cattle also has a positive effect on weaning weight, which I'm sure you're all aware of. These cows that produce more milk tend to wean heavier calves. However, we also know through a lot of research studies that milk production doesn't have quite the effect on weaning weight as the calf's own genetic makeup for growth. So the point is, milk production is not something you can ignore. You probably need to put a little selection pressure on it, but it's certainly not as much as weaning weight or the calf's own genetic makeup for growth. Some of these traits that we talk about, and you hear producers talk about them from time to time, like survivability, cow longevity, and even health traits, while they may be very economically valuable, they tend to have very low heritabilities, and they don't respond very well to genetic selection. These types of traits can be used for bull selection, and I certainly encourage it, but don't overemphasize them, because if you do, you could have lowered economic outcomes, except in extreme cases. Now, what do I mean by extreme cases? If you've got a real problem in your herd with survivability or longevity, your cows just don't live very long, don't survive, it may help you to put a little selection pressure on the bulls that you're purchasing, and it may help you to look at EPDs for longevity. But it's probably going to help you a whole lot more if you look around the environment you're raising those animals in and figure out there's something that's causing them to have decreased longevity that has nothing to do with their genetics. Some other things to think about: carcass traits, mature body size, and conformational traits, as I mentioned, tend to be highly heritable, and you can make genetic improvement on these relatively quickly. However, for most of the time, these types of traits, particularly carcass traits and conformational traits, cattle must be marketed correctly to take advantage of these. If you're selling calves at weaning, you're not going to be able to take advantage of genetic improvements in carcass traits because those things don't show up until the animal's finished and they go to slaughter, and depending on how they grade. Also, conformation. In case you're wondering what I mean by that, cattle's conformation will change as they mature. When they go from young calves to a mature 2-year-old or 3-year-old. You may be able to look at some calves when they're very young, 3 to 6 months of age or at weaning and tell that's, they're very good looking, very eye appealing, they got good conformation. But keep in mind that can change quite a bit over the next year or two. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about here in terms of traits is multiple trait selection. Again, those of you that have been through the Master Cattleman program, heard me talk about a whole section of this. Selection from more than one trait can have added benefits of increasing calf value and reducing cow maintenance costs. So I would strongly encourage you to look at multiple traits when you're selecting bulls. Don't just look at growth traits. Don't just look at scrotal circumference. Don't just look at fertility traits or maternal traits or whatever. It's a good idea. It's a great idea to look at multiple traits, but there are some ways of doing that are more efficient and work better. And if you remember from the Master Cattleman program, I talked about index values. Most breed associations nowadays of beef cattle do calculate various EPD index values, and they use different combinations of traits to add value to the selection decision, the bulls that you're buying. And they also do that to simplify bull selection decisions, so you don't have as much information you have to go through. So I'd strongly encourage you when you're going out and buying bulls, and I don't care if you're a registered breeder or a commercial breeder, learning to use index selection can be a valuable tool for you to increase the value of your calves and also reduce the cost of your cows. You just have to make sure that you are using an index from a breed association and you understand what that index is and what traits it's selecting for. The last thing I want to talk about real quick is crossbreeding, because I know it's a very big topic in the beef industry. It's an excellent method for improving economic value in commercial beef cattle herds. Crossbreeding takes advantage of genetic interactions to produce enhanced phenotypic performance for many traits. And again, if you went through the Master Cattleman program, you heard me talk about this there. I was just talking to Jason before we came on this live about a producer up in North Louisiana I just talked to the other night that raised a bunch of F1 Brahma Hereford steers on contract on ryegrass this past spring, and he told me he averaged over 2 pounds of gain a day for the period they were on that grass. So that's just an example that crossbreeding does enhance phenotypic performance for many traits. That effect is what we call heterosis or hybrid vigor. I want to remind you, though, to keep in mind that crossbreeding effects are phenotypic effects caused by gene interactions. They're caused by the interactions of genes on the chromosomes from 2 different breeds. And they probably won't be passed on to the next generation, because what those animals, if you breed them and they produce gametes, it's not the combination of chromosomes that are passed on to the next generation, but individual chromosomes. So it's very difficult to pass on those exact combinations that cause that heterosis. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, while crossbred females may produce fast-growing calves, or F1 Brahma Hereford steers may grow faster, that effect will probably not be passed on to the female offspring of those F1s. In other words, what you always run into problems with is what do you do with the F1 females? What do you breed those to? The other thing about crossbreeding that makes it very valuable is it's an excellent method to combine differences from different breeds for different traits. Combining 2 or more breeds may cause one breed's performance for a particular trait to complement the performance of another for that trait. For example, probably the oldest known crossbred combination in North America, it's been around for 50, 60 years now or longer than that, is Hereford Angus. And what the old Hereford Angus crosses would do was take advantage of a little bit higher growth rates from the Hereford, combined with better maternal ability, a little better reproduction, and carcass quality from the Angus. So they perfectly complemented themselves. Okay, Always keep in mind, again, that this is usually a one-generation complement, unless a third breed is introduced into a crossbreeding system. In other words, if you have an Angus-Hereford cross, that's half Angus, half Hereford, and you come back and breed that animal to an Angus bull, that F2 generation, you now have a 3/4 Angus and 1/4 Hereford, so you're going to lose some of those heterosis effects. Okay, and the only way to probably maintain a little bit higher level of that is if you came in and bred that Angus Hereford F1 to another breed, Simmental, Charolais, Brahman, whatever it is. But even in that case, you're going to have an animal, an F2, that's going to be half Simmental, 1/4 Hereford, 1/4 Brahman, or Angus, I'm sorry. So even in that situation, in the F2 generation, you're going to lose a little heterosis. So the problem with crossbreeding are always what to do. What do you breed the F1 females to? And the other problem is, how do you replace them when they leave the herd? If your F1 females are producing some really fast growing calves and they're really taking advantage of that heterosis, when that F1 cow becomes too old to reproduce, and she doesn't perform anymore, and you have to replace her, you got to have something to replace her with. If you want to maintain that same level of performance, you're going to have to go out and figure out a way to get some more F1 heifers. You're going to probably have to buy them unless you have the resources to maintain two separate breeds. All right, how do you determine which breeds to cross? Now, that's a question I get a lot. The best answer that I can give you is always choose breeds which complement each other for economically important traits. Like I just mentioned here, this black baldy calf. Crossbreeding breeds which are similar for many traits, you may not get enhanced heterosis, or hybrid vigor as much as you would like. So the best answer is try to figure out breeds that have some differences. Okay, the more differences for these economically important traits that you're looking for, the more heterosis you're going to tend to get. And my final thoughts on this is bull selection is a very powerful tool to enhance economic performance in commercial beef cattle operations. Again, I'll bring up the Master Cattleman program, and any of you have gone through that, you've heard me say that about 80 to 90% of the genetic improvement you do in a cattle herd is due to your bull, because you can put so much more selection pressure on bulls, and they leave so many more sets of their genes or copies of their genes in your herd. So bull selection is a powerful tool for improving or enhancing your economic performance in your cattle, even in commercial operations. However, I'll finish with this thought and say equally valuable is a good breeding plan. One way to increase the value of the calves you're producing is to create groups of calves to market that are uniform in size and performance. If you can market a group of calves that are all the same size and weight and they're very uniform in conformation, they're probably going to bring you more money than marketing single calves, at different times, at odd times. The better job you can do providing uniform calves to meet the seasonal markets, the time when those calves are going to be needed to go to the feedlots, the more money they're going to be worth to you, the more valuable they'll be. The best way to ensure that uniformity is to use a limited breeding season of 60 to 90 days. And if anything, I would tell commercial beef producers, there's probably two things I'd recommend to you. Cover those darn round bales so you don't lose them. You don't lose the nutritional value of them, and start using a limited breeding season. Pull those bulls out after about 90 days. Also, technologies such as ovulation synchronization, especially in heifers, can really help you ensure the majority of your calves are born within that window. We know now from a management standpoint, the better job you do managing those heifers when they're first calf heifers, the better they're going to perform throughout their lives. What that means is the bigger they are and the better they're grown off, it is going to make them stay in your herd and last longer. The earlier you get them bred during the breeding season and the more uniform your breeding season is on those heifers, means they're going to have a lot better opportunity to breed back next year when they become a mature cow. So with that, I'll end here. Be glad to take a few questions if we need to, and if not, I'm gonna turn it back over to Jason.
All right, thank you, Dr. Hay. If you'll stop sharing your screen for me real quick, I'll pop up this this survey slide while we're waiting to see if we've got any questions. All right, so on your screen now, you should have a QR code that's there that you can use with your smartphone to give us a little bit of feedback in terms of a survey related to our Beef Brunch webinars. These are very important to us as we move forward with these webinar events. So please just you can just use the camera on your smartphone, scan that QR code. It'll take you to the survey. Shouldn't take you very long to do that. I'm going to minimize that. Get back over here to make sure we don't have any questions. And I don't see any. So Dr. Hay, can you see that Beef Brunch Educational Series slide? Is that what you're looking at?
I can, yes.
All right, okay. So I don't see any questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap this up. So Dr. Hay, first and foremost, thank you again for your time this morning. Appreciate you sharing with us. We will be posting this recording online in the next few days. It'll be found on the LSU Ag Center-Livestock. Again, that's LSU Ag Center-Livestock YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe to that channel. It will also be out on the Beef Brunch webpage, located at lsuagcenter.com/beef brunch under past webinars. Our next Beef Brunch will be at 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday, December the 8th. Mr. Boo Persica, the LSU Meat Science Laboratory Manager and Instructor, will be discussing beef for the holidays. A flyer is posted under future webinars on our Beef Brunch site. Again, that's located at lsuagcenter.com/beef brunch. Please don't forget to complete the survey linked by the QR code on the last slide. The survey link will also be posted on the video's description on YouTube. It'll